forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads, prefer a dunk, and expect nothing but the best. It's Bigger 10. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings. Welcome to a special mini bonus exclusive episode of Bigger 10. I am Steve Deace alongside my never partner but co-host, the one and only Nosferatu himself, Aaron McIntyre. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Doing well. Doing really well. There's just this slight tinge of warmth and moisture outside. Shamrock shakes are back at McDonald's.
Thank you for reminding me of that. I had forgotten, actually.
And we're talking brackets, so it's one of the most wonderful times of the year.
It
Not
is.
the most, but one of the most.
There are two times of the year where you feel like we made it. We got here.
Yep.
Okay? The start of college football season is the big one, right? But the second one is when the calendar turns to March, particularly if you live in the wintry parts of the country. And we are on the brink of what I think now is the singular greatest sporting event in this country every year, the NCAA tournament. So back when I was in college, and this is when bracketology and the RPI first emerged and kind of became a cottage industry on ESPN. And I'm like, I used to watch this, Aaron, and I'm like, how hard is it to friggin' get 98, 99% of the teams right? When you are putting out the final bracket minutes before the official one comes out, you know who all the automatic bids is. That's 31 of the spots right there, right? And then you really know who all the at-large teams are, except for maybe 3 or 4 spots. So what I started doing just for fun is I would do one bracketology every year, but I would do it 2 weeks before Selection Sunday, before any conference tournament games were played, so there were no automatic bids that were awarded yet, and I wanted to see how many teams I could get right. I've been doing this every year since like the mid-90s. Last year, I got 75% of the teams correct. 89% of the at-large teams correct. Now, keep in mind, that's without knowing who any of the automatic bids were going to be, right? Because I'm just on a mission to prove how overrated bracketologist is, that there's really not that much skill to it, okay? And it's even easier now with the NCAA net rankings. Last year was one of the most accurate years I've ever had because the net rankings are pretty much going to tell you who 90% of the at-large bids are. Then you just got to figure out who the couple of outliers are on the way in or the way out, right? All right. So this year I thought, let's go ahead and unveil that right here on Bigger 10. And let's start by walking the audience through the process I use for doing this. I do the exact same process they do in the selection committee with one exception. They get the luxury of the automatic bids playing out for themselves, right? Well, if I'm going to do this 2 weeks before Selection Sunday, Aaron, I got to predict the automatic bids. So looking at conference tournaments and who's hot, the standings, the seedings, where some of these events are played. Are they on campus sites or neutral sites where there might be a home court advantage? These are the 31 teams that I have predicted to win automatic bids to the NCAA tournament. Is there anything there that you're like, that's crazy, that's nuts, or interesting?
Missouri Valley. Now, I do like this pick, though. It's a little bit of an outlier. Drake just annihilated Loyola not
and they
too
beat
long
them
ago.
twice,
And they beat them twice,
Yeah.
and this was just a couple of weeks ago. Loyola's not playing super great right now either, and I believe they are in. Are they in the path? Is Loyola in Drake's path to the championship?
Yes, because UNI is the number 1 seed,
correct.
and so they're 2 and 3. Yes.
So I think that's an interesting call right there. The rest of this, nothing really stands out to me. I think Illinois is a pretty good call. I would say they are the best team from top to bottom built for March right now in the Big Ten. So I like that call there. And the rest of this, nothing stands out of preeminence right now.
One of the things I went for this year is there were some teams that returned a lot from teams that had crushing defeats in their conference tournaments last season and therefore couldn't get into the NCAAs. And so I thought that this might be a year for those teams with that extra chip on their shoulder in order to get off the schneid and get over the hump. So that would apply, for example, to Bryant would be in that group, Toledo would be in that group, Drake would be in that group, Texas Southern would be in that group. So that was one of the trend lines that I looked for when I did my automatic bids. So with those 31 bids determined, we've now got to come up with the 37 at-large bids, who are the next 37 best teams in the country. And I not only did that, but I even ranked them 1 through 37. And I got to tell you, again, I've been doing this now for almost 30 years, Aaron, and this is for more than 25 years, I should say. This was the weakest field of at-large teams I have ever seen. Once I got past Marquette, well, let's go Seton Hall at 21. Normally I can get to about 30 or 35, and I think those teams have probably earned their way in. And, TCU beat Kansas last night. I did this before that, so maybe they would move into that earned spot. All right. So let's say if I did this over again, TCU would actually be 22 right now. They'd be up about 5 spots. And that might be the line where I drew a line and said, okay, these are the teams that I think with resumes have earned their way in. And everybody else now is just the best of the lot of who is left, trying to compare very flawed resumes. There is a lot of that this year. What do you think when you take a look at that?
I largely agree. And one of the things that I really, and this goes all the way to the top too. This goes all the way to, the top 5 teams, even in the net or Ken Palm. Overall, it's a week overall, all the way top to bottom. It's weak. And I say weak when I'm not saying they're bad teams. It's just, I judge just from the consistency. How easy is it for you to duplicate your results on the court? And as a college basketball bettor, it's one of my favorite sports to bet. This is the worst season in the 3 or 4 years of betting college basketball that I've had, because these teams are all over the place. There's really very little consistency that I've seen all the way. I mean, look at what happened on Saturday. 6 of the top 16 teams and 7 of the top 10 lost in the AP poll. So I think that kind of makes your point there, and especially when it comes to the bottom. We talked at length last week about the net rankings and some of the flaws with that too. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. A
great example is Providence. What have they won, like 11 or 14 games by 5 points or less this year? And there's only one other consistent top 15 team in the Big East, and it's Villanova, and they've lost to them twice, even though they're the Big East champion. So I think that kind of gives you an idea of how we could go with parity, competitive, watered down, whichever description you want, that this sport is for this season. All right, so now that we have our automatics and our at-larges, we now rank the entire field of 68, because this is going to determine how we do seeding. Now, when we put our bracket together, we can't just do a straight ranking of these, because you have some rules. You don't want to put teams in the same conference together if you can avoid it, particularly in the first couple of rounds. You don't want to put teams that played each other at all in the regular season together if you can avoid it, particularly in the first couple of rounds. You can't let teams have a home court advantage, for example. But ranking the field 1 through 68, this is what I came up with from STEM at Gonzaga to Stern with Norfolk State at 68. Anything there that you think, hey, that's interesting, or I take issue with?
Well, you did this before. Did you do this weekend after Saturday?
After Saturday. I did it Sunday night after all the Sunday games were done. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Wisconsin has a chance to move up into the top 8 now after they've beaten Purdue twice now.
Yeah, I agree. They would be higher.
And if they make a run in the Big Ten tournament as well, they could really move up.
I think Kansas would actually drop off the 1 line if I had to do it again.
Yeah,
I think Wisconsin would move up maybe to a higher 3 seed, or maybe even to a 2. Yeah. And Kansas would drop off the 1 line if I had to do it again.
Yeah. So having made this on Sunday, I think this makes a lot of sense. I'm, Indiana, there were some questions about them, but I think they have probably solidified themselves in the field. TCU would probably move up a little bit, as we talked about a little bit ago as well. And I'm surprised you've got both. You've got the Missouri Valley, not to harp on them. I'm just looking forward to Arch Madness this weekend. It's one of my favorite tournaments. You've got them as a 2-bid league. Again, that kind of shows you I guess, the weakness of the field overall. Usually
and that doesn't count the regular season champion, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. So I think these look pretty good, especially if we're having done them on Sunday.
All right, so now, and of course, I'm projecting. I was projecting that Michigan would beat Michigan State and then split with Iowa and Ohio State, and that would move their net probably to somewhere around 30, which is why right now I have them as an 8th seed, where most people have them as a 10 or 11.
Yep.
So these are projections of how I think the season will go, just as if you're wondering if I think this team's a little bit too low or this team's a little bit too high. All right. Now let's go region by region, and we put them in the pods. Let's start with the East, all right? And they will play their regionals in Philadelphia this year. The number 1 seed I have in the East region is the Auburn Tigers. And if there's one program you do not want to see in a 1/16, it is Princeton. There's a lot of history there. I didn't intend for that to happen. It just worked itself out when I did the rankings. The aforementioned Michigan Wolverines and the 8-9 against Boise State. Doesn't this seem like it should be maybe more of a football region?
Yep.
Buffalo, we go next. Houston, the number 4 seed there against Iona, the number 13 seed. Providence, the 5 seed against the 12 seed, which is the winner of the play-in game in my bracket, Loyola of Chicago and Davidson. Indianapolis, Purdue gets a massive advantage there with Cleveland State, and then USC and Memphis in the 6-11 game. And then Baylor gets the advantage of traveling to Fort Worth as the number 2 seed against Vermont. And Alabama, which can shoot themselves in or out of the tournament on any given night against one of the surprising teams this year, 10th seeded Wake Forest. Your thoughts?
Yeah, this would be an exciting region. One standout to me, I think Loyola is probably good enough to beat Davidson. This is from the little bit that I've watched them this season. Seems like a slightly different Loyola team. They shoot from outside, actually, or they have the ability to shoot from outside exceptionally well. But slowing it down, or going at a pace that Providence likes to play at, I think that's either going to be an opportunity for an upset at the 12, the 12-5 upset, or it's going to be an extremely boring game that Providence wins by like 4 or 5 points. Major upset alert, I would say. There's a small chance, depending on what, Purdue, is this at the same venue that they're playing the Big Ten tournament at?
Yes.
In Indianapolis?
Or it might actually be at Lucas Oil, actually.
Okay, yeah. So depending on the venue, Purdue might have an advantage having been there just the week before. If it's not, though, and they have trouble adjusting, that's an underrated part of March Madness. You're used to play, the matchups, and then the venues that you're playing at. If you can get those sight lines down, there might be an opportunity for a big upset there with Purdue and Cleveland State, because a lot of these mid majors, again, strength this season down a little bit, but I think Cleveland State might have a little chance there.
Well, you get into matchups, and that's where if I'm Auburn, I'm going to play two. In this, hypothetical, I could in the Sweet 16 play Houston or Providence, two senior-driven, gritty, gutty, tempo and slowing you down kind of teams. When I want to get up and down the court, those are often the recipes for upsets in the NCAA tournament. Our next region in the South, this regional will take place in San Antonio. We go back to the Indianapolis again for the pod. Boy, Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce is going to love me. Purdue and Kentucky are the two teams coming there. I mean, goodness gracious. And on the heels of the NFL Combine, they're printing money in Indianapolis if this were the bracket. Kentucky would face one of the other play-in game winners, Norfolk State or Texas Southern. UConn making it back to the NCAA tournament for the first time in several years in an 8-9 game against Colorado State. Wisconsin, we've already talked about them. They would move up from the 4 line, but I think they'd be fine being the 4 if it meant they were playing in Milwaukee, particularly given this bracket. I mean, St. Mary's is a very good basketball team, but they're going to play a style that Wisconsin is very comfortable with already. So, John Beilein used to say at Michigan, it ain't where you're seated, it's who you play and when you play. That's an excellent pod for Wisconsin, even if they're seated a little too low. In Portland, we have UCLA goes out there against Texas State. Michigan State from the Big Ten heads out there against Florida. UCLA and Michigan State maybe for the second year in a row in the NCAA tournament. They played in a play-in game last year, remember. And then the number 2 seed in San Diego, Texas Tech against Furman, and then Marquette against Notre Dame. And for those of us that remember growing up in the 70s and 80s and watching those NBC games with Dick Enberg and Al McGuire, that's kind of a throwback to that era a little bit.
This is the tough draw region. UConn, it's an 8-9, so it should be even, but Colorado State is very well coached. So that's kind of a tough draw for UConn. Tough draw for if you're, I guess you could look at it either way, but I think that's a tough draw for both St. Mary's and Drake. St. Mary's just annihilated Gonzaga, but Drake is not the tip. I mean, if in this scenario, they will have just won the Missouri Valley tournament, and I think you could probably do worse with a 12 seed, or if you're from St. Mary's perspective, you could probably get a better draw than that. Michigan State versus Florida, that would be a tough draw for Michigan State as well, and then Marquette versus Notre Dame too. Depending on what night you catch Notre Dame on, that could be a very difficult matchup for Marquette too.
The next region we will take a look at, we'll go out west. This regional will take place in San Francisco. The number one seed out there is my number one seed overall, Gonzaga, playing close by in Portland against either Bryant or New Orleans. VCU and Creighton in the 8-9 game. I know a lot of people have Creighton out of it right now. I think Creighton will win 2 big home games this week and in order to put themselves in. So that's why I have them in there. Buffalo is where Tennessee goes as the number 4 seed. And they're obviously the lowest rated number 4 seed I have.
Sending them to Buffalo.
Which is why they had no home court advantage. Yeah. So Tennessee against Toledo, the 13th seed, the champions of the MAC. That would not be an easy game for Tennessee at all. The 5-12 matchup is Texas versus Indiana. And then we go to Milwaukee. Illinois goes there as the number 3 seed against Long Beach State. Iowa State, North Carolina in a first-round 6-11 matchup that I think would have a lot of interest in Milwaukee and a huge amount of Iowa State fans, by the way. And then we go to San Diego, number 2 seed Arizona, which was very impressive on the road at USC last night against 15th seeded Towson. And the 7-10 game is LSU versus TCU.
The 2 games that stick out to me, you already mentioned Iowa State versus North Carolina. That would be, I think, a really fun matchup to watch. And then LSU versus TCU, very contrasting styles of play there. If TCU can slow them down a little bit, get them kind of down into the muck and mire, they might have a chance for an upset there.
First one to 60 might win that game. Yeah. All right. And then the final region, let's go to the Midwest, where that regional will take place in Chicago. So bring your Kevlar. Number 1 seed, Kansas, against 16-seeded Winthrop. They're kind of a mid-major mainstay this time of year. 8-9 game is Seton Hall against Murray State. Ohio State, which would be lower if I did this today, as a number 4 seed against South Dakota State. Those last 2 4-13 games would be a lot of people's upset watches. Arkansas as a number 5 seed against the 12th seed, San Diego State, San Francisco. They would play on Wednesday. That's also a tough matchup there for the Hogs. In Pittsburgh, Villanova gets to stay in state as the 3 seed against Montana State. They would then play Iowa versus Virginia Tech on the other side of that bracket. And then we go back to Greenville again, where Duke has played in the NCAA tournament and ACC tournament there a lot over the years. This is Krzyzewski's, of course, his swan song. So they start off against Colgate and then would have Wyoming or North Texas in the next round.
Nothing. You already mentioned Ohio State versus South Dakota. If that matchup ended up coming through, there's a lot of offensive firepower in this
yes, there
region.
Is. Yeah.
Duke versus Colgate. You talked about LSU versus TCU being the first one to 60. Duke versus Colgate. Colgate's fairly good offensively. That could be a first one to 90 type of game. Otherwise, Iowa, Virginia Tech, I guess that's the only game that stands out to me that's a little bit differing styles. But the rest of this, nothing really stands out. I guess, okay, one, if this ended up coming to fruition here, Arkansas versus the winner of San Diego State versus San Francisco. That would be a battle of differing styles. That would be fun to see, and that might be an upset alert again. The 12-5, as always, being on upset alert, but nothing else really stands out there.
As you leave this up and we close it out here, Aaron, I think you start looking at, and obviously this is a hypothetical bracket, but it gives you an idea of how good Saturday and Sunday could be in the second round with a lot of these potential matchups. I mean, if you're Illinois, if you're Illinois, if you're Auburn, here's who you don't want to play. You don't want to be a high-seeded team that is playing a team that is a traditional power that's lower seeded, so you know the moment won't be too big for them. They won't be intimidated by that, right? So if I'm Auburn, I don't want to see Michigan in the second round. If I'm Illinois, I don't want to see North Carolina in the second round. You know, I those are the things that would concern me when I would be looking for first round upsets. Are teams that
UCLA, Michigan State.
UCLA, Michigan State's another one. If I beat them, it won't be because the moment was too big or they were just happy to be there, right? But there are so many good second round games here. And no matter how these teams get arranged when the actual bracket comes out here in about 10 days, as much as we love that first day, how good are those second round matchups looking like they could be?
Really entertaining. And the question that I had, I don't know if it was last week or a couple of weeks ago, you know, given the overall state of college basketball, if you want to call it parity, if you want to call it a down year, I didn't know if we were going to have a tournament full of carnage or kind of a boring tournament. Well, I think this last week really has answered that question. Mm-hmm. It's going to be, it's going to get nuts. It's going to be the Joker of all tournaments. It's going to be
put on your red bandanas when you fill out your bracket.
Chaos,
yes.
Exactly.
Well, this was a lot of fun. What'll be even more fun is when we get to talk about the real bracket here soon on Bigger Ten, and you know we will be doing that. So make sure you're tuned in there. Like, rate, subscribe, 5-star review, follow, share, please. Whether you're watching here on YouTube or listening on iTunes or elsewhere, help us to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you. Follow us on Twitter at Bigger Ten as well. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Deace. We'll see you next time right here on Bigger Ten.